What kind of man throws another man's tools on the floor and laughs while he picks them up? Roland Ashford was about to find out, and the answer was going to cost him everything he'd ever bragged about owning. It was 7:52 on a gray Tuesday in Chicago, the kind of morning where the lake throws cold air against the glass towers along Wacker Drive, and the city looks like it's still deciding whether to wake up. Up on the 44th floor of the Ashford building, in a boardroom with a view of a half-finished tower, wrapped in scaffolding, an old black man in a canvas work jacket sat alone at the long table, hands folded, a battered leather case beside his chair. He wasn't supposed to be impressive. That was the whole point. And in about 40 minutes, the most powerful man in that building was going to walk through the door, take one look at him, and make the worst decision of his entire life. His name was Isaiah Tate. 58 years old, born on the West Side, raised 3 blocks from the rail yard in a house his father built with his own hands on weekends, because that was the only time the man wasn't working someone else's job. If you'd passed Isaiah on the street that morning, you'd have seen scuffed boots, a jacket gone soft at the elbows, gray coming in at the temples, and you'd have made a guess. Day laborer, maintenance, somebody's grandfather who took a wrong turn. You'd have looked right through him, the way people had been looking through men like him his whole life. You'd have been wrong. But before we get to how wrong, you need to understand where Isaiah came from, because nothing about what happened that morning makes sense without it. So stay with me. And if you've ever been underestimated by somebody who thought they had you figured out, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button right now. Isaiah's father was a man named Eli Tate. Eli laid brick and stone in this city for 41 years. He worked on churches, on courthouses, on the lobbies of buildings, was never once allowed to use the front door. Eli had hands like cured leather and a back that gave out at 60, and he carried a brass and walnut level everywhere he went, an old thing his own father had handed him, worn smooth on the edges, from a half century of being gripped by working men. Eli used to set that level on a fresh course of stone, watch say the same thing every time, soft, almost to himself. Plumb and true. Plumb and true, son. Plumb and true, even when there's nobody around to check it. That was the whole creed. That was the entire religion of Eli Tate. You build it right when no one is watching, because the building doesn't care who was watching, and neither does God. When Isaiah was 9, he'd ride the bus downtown on Saturdays to watch his father work the stone facade of a new headquarters going up on LaSalle Street. He'd sit on an overturned bucket and eat a bologna sandwich, and watch Eli set each block like it was a sacred thing. That building, the one his father built, ever raised by a young, hungry developer named Roland Ashford. Crawford put his name on the lobby in 2-foot bronze letters. He put his face in the newspaper. And when the job ran long and money got tight, Roland Ashford held back 6 weeks of wages from the masonry crew and dared them to do something about it. Eli Tate never saw that money. He died at 63 with a bad back, a paid-off little house, and a level worn smooth, still saying plum, and true to a son who never forgot a word of it. Isaiah didn't go to college. He went to work. He swept floors on construction sites at 17, learned to read a blueprint at 20, learned how money actually moved through a building project at 25. And somewhere in there he figured out a thing that most men never figure out, which is that the people who own the buildings are almost never the people who know how to build them. He started small. He bought one foreclosed 3-flat on the south side, fixed it with his own hands, rented it, bought another. 20 years of 14-hour days. 20 years of being told no by banks that smiled while they did it. He called his company Keystone Holdings, after the stone at the top of an arch, the one that holds the whole weight. The one nobody notices until you take it out and watch everything fall. By 58, Isaiah Tate's name didn't appear in the society pages, and that was a choice. But behind the quiet, Keystone Holdings controlled commercial real estate from Detroit to Memphis, worth a little north of $3 billion. And 6 weeks before that gray Tuesday, Keystone had quietly closed on a controlling 61% stake in a struggling, scandal-soaked development firm, whose founder had been dead for 9 years and whose name was still bolted to a tower on Wacker Drive. The firm was called Ashford Holt. The man who would walk into that boardroom at 8:34 thought he still ran it. His name was Roland Ashford, Crawford's only son, 53 years old, and he had inherited exactly two things from his father: the company and the certainty that he deserved it. Roland had never poured a foundation, never read a soil report, never stayed past 6. He'd run Ashford Holt into 3 straight years of losses, settled 2 wrongful termination suits with money the company didn't have, and buried a federal wage complaint under a pile of non-disclosure agreements. The senior partners had watched the firm bleed, and the family trust had watched its fortune shrink, and quietly, painfully, they had agreed to sell. The buyer asked for one condition before he took over, and only the lawyers knew what it was. The buyer said, "Don't announce me. Let me walk the building first. Let me see how it treats a man who can't do anything for it. That tells you everything you'll ever need to know about what you're buying." That's why Isaiah Tate was sitting in that boardroom in a canvas jacket, with his father's level in a leather case at his feet. He'd come up the freight elevator at 7:48. The young woman at the executive reception desk had looked at his boots and his jacket and asked if he was there about the HVAC. He'd said he had a meeting. She hadn't believed him, but it was early and she didn't want the trouble, so she'd waved him toward the glass room at the end of the hall. He'd thanked her by name because her name was on a little plate on the desk, and Isaiah was the kind of man who read those. Then he'd sat down, opened his folder, and waited. At 8:34, the glass door swung open hard, and Roland Ashford walked into the worst morning of his life. He came in the way men like Roland always come in, talking. Before he was fully through the door, phone in one hand, a paper coffee cup in the other, his charcoal suit pressed to a knife's edge and a watch on his wrist worth more than Eli Tate had earned in a year of laying stone. He was mid-sentence to nobody, complaining about traffic on the Kennedy, and he didn't see Isaiah at first. He went straight to the side counter, set down his cup, checked his reflection in the window glass, smoothed his tie. Then he turned around and he saw the old man at his table, and everything about his face changed. It wasn't surprise. Surprise would have been human. Surprise would have been human. It was the look a man gives a stain on his carpet. Whoa. No, absolutely not. Roland set his phone down on the marble with a click. Who are you? How'd you get up here? Isaiah looked up, calm. The way the lake is calm in the early morning, before the wind finds it. Good morning. I'm here for the 9 o'clock. You're here for the... Roland actually laughed, short and ugly, the kind of laugh that's really a door slamming. No, you're not. There's no version of this morning where you're here for anything. This is the executive floor. The loading dock is downstairs and around back. Whatever you're delivering, it doesn't come through here. I'm not delivering anything, Isaiah said. I was asked to be here. Roland walked closer, slow, that paper coffee cup back in his hand now, sipping from it like he had all the time in the world, and the old man was a minor weather event he'd wait out. He stopped a few feet away and looked Isaiah up and down, from the gray at his temples to the soft elbows of the canvas jacket to the worn leather case beside his chair. By who? Because I run this company, friend. 20 years. There is not a single meeting on this floor that I don't know about, and I'd remember if I'd invited. He gestured at all of Isaiah with the coffee cup, a little circular wave. This. There it was. This. Like Isaiah was a thing and not a man. Now I want you to notice something, because it matters later. Roland Ashford had a name floating around in the back of his head that morning. Keystone. He'd heard the firm had been sold to some outfit called Keystone, some out-of-town money. The lawyers had been emailing him for 6 weeks. He'd been skimming those emails between tea times and deleting most of them, because in 20 years of being the loudest man in every room, Roland had developed a talent for never reading anything that might change how he felt about himself. For half a second, standing there, some small, honest part of his brain reached for the connection. Old man. Quiet. Meeting. Keystone. The lawyers. But Roland's pride got to that thought before it could finish, wrapped a hand around its throat, and squeezed until it stopped moving. You know what? I don't even need to know how you got up here, Roland said. I just need you gone. He reached down, and before Isaiah could say a word, he flipped open the worn leather case sitting beside the chair. He found himself looking at a brass and walnut level, old, the wood gone dark and smooth with handling, a hairline of tarnish along the metal edge. There was something engraved on the brass plate, small letters, worn faint. Roland didn't read them. He never read anything. "What is this? You brought your little toolbox." He picked it up by one end, between two fingers, the way you'd hold something you found in a gutter. He turned it over, and the small glass vial in the center caught the gray light, the bubble, drifting. "You wandered up here to fix something? Buddy, there's nothing on this floor for you to fix." He gave it a careless little toss back toward the case, the way you toss your keys on a counter. He missed. The level skidded across the polished marble of the table, slid past 3 chairs, and went off the far edge. It hit the floor with a sound, a dull, awful, final crack of old wood against cold stone, and the glass vial in the center splintered, a spiderweb of white across the little window, the bubble gone. For the first time that morning, something moved behind Isaiah Tate's eyes. Not anger. Anger would have been easy. It was something slower and heavier than that, something that settled down into the man's bones and got comfortable, like a verdict being written. Eli Tate's level had survived 41 years on scaffolding, 2 world wars worth of weather, a fall off a 4-story platform in 1974. It had not survived 11 seconds in a room with Roland Ashford. Isaiah did not get up, not yet. He looked at his father's level on the floor, the cracked glass, and then he looked back at Roland, and he said, very quietly, "You should pick that up." Roland blinked, and then he smiled, because no one talked to him that way, and the novelty of it amused him. "I should pick it up." He set his coffee on the table, leaned down, so his face was level with the old man's, close enough that Isaiah could smell the burnt espresso on his breath. "Let me explain how this works, because clearly nobody ever has. My father built this company out of dirt. My name is on the front of this building in bronze. The chair you're sitting in, the table you've got your hands on, the air you're breathing 44 floors up. That's mine, all of it. And you came up here in your little jacket with your little box of tools thinking what exactly? That you belong at this table?" He straightened up. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his money clip, peeled off a folded $50 bill, and dropped it on the table in front of Isaiah like he was tipping a valet. "Here, there's a coffee cart in the lobby. Get yourself something. Get me one too while you're at it. Oat milk, and keep whatever's left over. Consider it the most you'll make all week." Then he did a thing that 4 people would later have to watch on a security recording. A thing that made every one of them feel sick. He reached down and patted Isaiah twice on the shoulder. 2 light taps, the way you'd pat the hood of a car you'd decided to buy. "Run along now." Then Roland walked to the head of the table, dropped into the big chair, the one that had been his father's, picked his phone back up, and started scrolling, completely at ease, completely satisfied. A man who believed he had just set the world back the way it was supposed to be. What Roland did not notice, what men like Roland never notice, was the small black dome in the corner of the ceiling, the security camera that Roland Ashford had installed decades ago, and that Roland himself had upgraded 2 years back, recording every word. He did not notice that the head of building security, a quiet, square-shouldered man named Vernon Pratt, had stepped off the elevator and was standing just outside the glass, perfectly still, watching. And he did not notice the young assistant by the door, a 24-year-old, named Andre Coleman, who'd been hired 4 months ago, who had seen the whole thing, and who was standing frozen with a stack of folders against his chest, every instinct in his body screaming at him to do something, while another voice, the careful one, the one that wanted to keep his job, told him to look at the floor. Andre looked at the floor. Isaiah Tate sat in silence and let the room hold still around him. Then, slowly, he stood. He walked the length of that long table, past 3 chairs, to where his father's level lay on the cold marble. He bent down. His knees weren't young anymore, and you could see it cost him something. He picked the level up with both hands, the way you'd lift a sleeping child, turned it over, looked at the cracked glass where the bubble used to float, and ran his thumb once across the faint engraving on the brass plate, the one Roland never read. Then he carried it back, set it gently in its case, and sat down again. He left the $50 bill exactly where it had landed. He looked at it for a moment. Then he picked it up, folded it once more, and put it in his shirt pocket. Not because he wanted it. You'll understand why in a minute. And then they started arriving. The senior partners came in over the next several minutes, one at a time, and here's the thing. Each one of them stopped, just for a heartbeat, when they saw the old man in the canvas jacket at the table. Because each of them had spent the last 6 weeks in closed-door sessions looking at a photograph, they knew exactly who Isaiah Tate was. A woman named Gloria Mercer, the firm's longest-serving partner, caught the eye of the man beside her and gave the smallest shake of her head. Say nothing. They sat. They opened their folders. They did not look at Roland, who was still scrolling, still oblivious, occasionally glancing at Isaiah with a little curl of his lip, muttering once, just loud enough. Unbelievable. Nobody downstairs doing their job. The last man through the door was the firm's outside counsel, a tall, white-haired attorney named Harlan Voss, 71 years old, who had handled Ashford Holt's legal affairs since before Roland was old enough to ruin them. Harlan took one look at the room. Roland sprawled at the head of the table. The old man banished to the far end, the partners sitting in a silence you could lean against. And he understood the entire situation in the time it took to set down his briefcase. He sat. He took out a leather portfolio, and he began, quietly, to write. Out in the hallway, a young woman named Sophie Ashford, Roland's daughter, 27, just hired in the firm's marketing department that spring, had stopped at the glass to watch. She'd seen the level hit the floor. She'd seen her father pat the old man's shoulder. She stood there with her hand pressed flat against the glass, and she did not come in because she had spent 27 years learning that you do not interrupt her father in front of an audience. She would think about that morning every day for the rest of her life. At 9 o'clock exactly, the chairman of the firm's board, a sharp-eyed woman in her 60s named Frances Webb, walked in, and she did not walk in the way you walk into a meeting. She walked in the way a doctor walks into a room with bad news already decided. Roland looked up and brightened, relief washing over his face. Frances, thank God. We've got a situation. Somebody let a...
Sit down, Roland. I'm just saying, security needs to... Roland.
She didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. It was the kind of voice that moves a man without touching him. Sit.
Down.
He sat. Some animal part of him made the decision before his pride could argue. Frances Webb stood at the head of the table, and she did not look at Roland. She looked at the room. Then she said, "Before we begin, I'd like to formally introduce the gentleman most of you have already been briefed on over the last 6 weeks. As of the close of business 3 days ago, Keystone Holdings holds a controlling interest in this firm. Effective today, this firm has a new chairman and chief executive." She turned, finally, and extended her hand toward the far end of the table, toward the old man in the canvas jacket sitting 14 feet from the throne he'd been chased away from. "This is Isaiah Tate, founder and principal of Keystone Holdings, with his name on the front of it. The man who now watched a lot of faces fall in my time. I have never seen one fall like Roland Ashford's fell that morning. It didn't happen all at once. It happened in stages, like a building coming down floor by floor. First the smile, which didn't so much disappear as die where it stood. Then the color draining out of his face from the top down, leaving him gray as the morning. Then his mouth opened, and closed, and opened again, and nothing came out of it at all. That's Francis. That's a joke," he finally managed. "Tell me that's a joke." Nobody at that table was smiling. Not Frances Webb, not Gloria Mercer, not Harlan Voss, who had stopped writing and folded his hands. Not one person in that room found it funny. Isaiah Tate stood up. He pushed his chair back, and the small scrape above it against the marble was the loudest sound in the room. He walked the length of the table, 14 feet, slow, unhurried, his work boots quiet on the stone, every eye following him, until he stood beside the big chair where Roland sat gripping the armrests with both hands, his knuckles white. For the first time that morning, Roland Ashford had to look up at the old man instead of down. "Mr. Tate," he started, and his voice cracked on it. "This is a terrible misunderstanding. I had no idea." "Stand up," Isaiah said. Roland didn't move. "Stand up out of my chair, Mr. Ashford." He stood. His legs were unsteady under him. Isaiah reached into his shirt pocket, took out the folded $50 bill, and held it up between two fingers so the whole room could see it. "You told me to get myself a coffee," he said, quiet and even. "Said it was the most I'd make all week." He stepped forward and tucked the bill carefully into the breast pocket of Roland's pressed charcoal suit, then smoothed it flat, with two fingers, gentle, almost kind. "You can buy your own coffee, son. As of this minute, your company card, your car service, your expense account, and your access to every floor of this building are gone." Then he pulled out the big chair, his father's old enemy's chair, the throne, and he sat down in it. The leather sighed under him. The gray morning light came through the window and caught the worn brass plate of the level lying in its open case on the table. And for just a second, you could almost read the engraving. "Now," Isaiah said, looking up at the man standing in front of him, let's talk about what happened in this room." He opened the case and lifted out his father's level, set it on the marble in front of him, the cracked glass facing up. "My father carried this for 41 years. His father carried it before him. He laid stone in this city until his back gave out, and he laid the first stone of the first building, Crawford Ashford, the building on LaSalle. You know the one." Roland's eyes flickered. "Your father held back 6 weeks of wages from that crew when the job ran long. My father went to his grave, never seeing that money. He was 63. Isaiah ran his thumb once across the cracked glass. "He used to say a thing every time he set this on a fresh course of stone. Plumb and true, even when there's nobody around to check it. That was how he measured a man. Not by what he did in front of the cameras. By what he did when he thought nobody who mattered was watching." He looked up, and the room was so quiet you could hear the air moving through the vents far overhead. "This morning, you thought nobody who mattered was watching. So you showed me exactly who you are. You called me this. You told me to fetch your coffee. You threw a piece of my father on the floor and broke it." He paused. "And every word of it was recorded by a camera you upgraded yourself 2 years ago."
"Mr. Tate."
Roland's voice was barely there now. "If I had known who you were..." "Stop." The word landed like a dropped beam. "That right there. If I had known who you were. That means you'd have done all of it to any man who came up here in a work jacket without a title to protect him. As long as he was nobody, it was sport. That's not a bad morning, son. That's just you without an audience you're afraid of." He turned to Vernon Pratt, who had come in and was standing by the door. "Vernon, walk Mr. Ashford to collect his personal items. Personal only. Then off the premises. Every access revoked. Effective now." Vernon stepped forward, his face professional, his eyes telling a longer story. "Mr. Ashford, come with me." Roland grabbed his arm. "Desperate now. Vernon, you've worked here 12 years. You know me. That wasn't." Vernon looked at him, and for a long moment he said nothing. Then quietly, 12 years, Mr. Ashford. In all that time, the only morning you ever learned at Ashford. My first name was the morning you needed me to drag an old man out of his own boardroom." He took his hand off the elevator button. "I won't be doing that." The doors opened. Roland Ashford stepped in, and the last thing the room saw, before the doors closed, was his face, gray and slack, and already older than it had been an hour before. Upstairs, Isaiah Tate sat in his chair at the head of the table. He picked up his phone and he dialed a number. And when the line connected, he didn't say much. He just said, "Pop." "We got the building." There was nobody on the other end of that line, not really. Eli Tate had been gone 11 years. But Isaiah said it anyway, looking out the window at the half-finished tower across the street. And the partners around that table pretended not to see the old man's eyes go wet, and they pretended not to need a moment themselves. Now, this is the part where you might think the story ends. The villain gets walked out. The good man gets the chair. Justice done, roll the credits. But real justice isn't a single morning. Real justice is slow and heavy, and it lands like settling concrete. A little more every day. And for Roland Ashford, that Tuesday was only the first stone to fall. Within a week, Isaiah Tate had every sealed personnel file in the company opened. What came out of those drawers told the same story over and over in different handwriting. A foreman named Calvin Boyd, fired in 2019 after he reported that the firm was shorting overtime on a city contract and ignoring a cracked support on a parking structure. He'd signed a non-disclosure agreement and taken a small settlement because he had 3 kids and a mortgage and no choice. There were others. A safety inspector pushed out for writing an honest report. 2 project managers, both black, both passed over for promotions that went to men with half their experience. And twice their confidence, Roland had buried all of it under paper and money, the way his father had buried 6 weeks of Mason's wages 30 years before. It ran in the family like a bad foundation. Isaiah called Calvin Boyd personally. Didn't promise him anything. Just asked one question, what happened to you? And then he listened, the way his father had taught him to listen. The way he'd built an entire fortune, listens to people that other men talked over. Calvin Boyd had been waiting 4 years for somebody to ask. The lawsuit that followed didn't stay quiet for long. The footage from that boardroom, the level hitting the floor, the pat on the shoulder, run along now, surfaced in a deposition, and from there it found its way to a courtroom, and then to the evening news. And the city of Chicago watched 23 minutes of who Roland Ashford really was. A jury awarded Calvin Boyd a number with a lot of zeros in it. A federal agency opened a wage theft investigation that reached back 2 decades and ended with Roland personally barred from serving as a corporate officer for the better part of his remaining career. The bronze letters of the family name came down off the lobby on Wacker Drive on a cold morning in March, and a crew of masons watched them go, and one of the older ones said he remembered the day they went up. Roland's wife filed for divorce the same month, and his daughter, Sophie, the young woman who'd stood at the glass with her hand pressed against it and said nothing. 3 weeks after the verdict, she filed paperwork to take her mother's maiden name. She gave exactly 1 interview to 1 reporter, and all she said was this: that recording wasn't my father having a bad day. That was my father with nobody around he was scared of. I spent my whole life making excuses for it. I'm finished. And here's the thing about Roland Ashford that I want you to sit with, because it's the part that should keep you up at night. He wasn't a monster. A monster would be easy. You'd see a monster coming. Roland was something quieter and far more common than a monster. He was an ordinary man who'd never once been told no, who was warm to anyone who could lift him and cruel to anyone who couldn't, who measured his own worth by how small he could make the people he'd decided didn't count. He lives in a quieter place now, plays golf alone on a public course, polite and forgotten. There are 100,000 men like him sitting at the heads of 100,000 tables right now. And the only difference between them and Roland is the camera in the corner that nobody remembered was on. That building on Wacker Drive has a new name on the front now. And on the wall outside the boardroom, on the 44th floor, there's a long row of photographs of the men and women who built this city with their hands and never got their names on anything. Masons, ironworkers, the crews who poured the foundations under every tower people take pictures of. The first photograph in that row is a grainy old shot of a man named Eli Tate, standing on a scaffold on LaSalle Street in 1971, with a brass and walnut level in his hand. Underneath the whole row, in plain steel letters, it says the thing his son carried out of that morning and never set down. Plumb and true, even when there's nobody around to check it. That young assistant, Andre Coleman, the one who stood frozen by the door and looked at the floor, Isaiah didn't fire him. He called him in a few days later and asked him one question. You saw the whole thing. You didn't say a word. Why? And Andre, to his credit, didn't make an excuse. He said, because I was scared of losing this job, and I've been ashamed of it every minute since. Isaiah looked at him a long time. Then he said, good. Stay ashamed of it just long enough to make sure you never do it again. Then let it go and do better. Andre runs the firm's apprenticeship program now. The one that brings kids off the west side onto real job sites and pays them an honest wage to learn a trade. First thing every new apprentice does is sit in that boardroom and watch 23 minutes of footage with no commentary at all. Nobody has ever walked out of that room the same. And the broken level sits in a glass case on the wall of that room. The cracked glass never repaired, on purpose. Right next to a folded $50 bill behind glass, with a small brass plate beneath it that reads, he offered this to a man he thought was nobody, to make him go away. It cost him everything he had instead. Isaiah Tate still walks into that boardroom some mornings before anyone else gets there. He sits in the chair he was chased out of, and he looks out at the skyline his father helped raise, and he runs his thumb across the cracked glass of the old level the way you'd touch the hand of someone you miss. And then he gets to work. So before you go, the storyteller's got 2 questions for you, and I want you to answer them honest. Have you ever walked into a room where somebody decided you were nobody, only to watch their face change when they found out who you really were? Drop it in the comments. Because I read every single one. But here's the harder question. The one that costs something. Have you ever been the one doing right through somebody before you knew what they were worth? Tell me that one too, if you've got the nerve. Like this, share it with somebody who needs to hear it. And remember the one thing Eli Tate spent his whole life trying to teach. The way a man behaves when he thinks nobody who matters is watching. That, and nothing else, is exactly who he is.